Republican presidential candidate Rand Paul thinks that income inequality exists because people don't work hard enough. Now, Rand Paul went on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace to discuss his presidential campaign and his plans for America. One of them, of course, being his so-called fair tax, flat tax plan. Now, Paul calls for a flat tax of about 14.5% on all different types of income. Which, by the way, that's even lower than the investment income that only gets taxed at 15%, capital gains. That's crazy. That's super low. Now, Chris Wallace is actually going to grill him about this tax plan in this next clip. Check this out.
Under your plan, a family making from $50,000 to $75,000 a year would get a 3% rise in income. Sounds pretty good, but a family making more than $1 million a year would get a 13% rise in income. Question, doesn't your plan massively increase income inequality?
Well, the thing is income inequality is due to some people working harder and selling more things. So if people voluntarily buy more of your stuff, you'll have more money. And it's a fallacious notion to say, oh, well, rich people get more money back in a tax cut. If you cut taxes 10%, 10% of $1 million is more than 10% of $1,000. So obviously people who pay more in taxes will get more back. But we all end up working for people who are more successful than us, and that's a good thing, that more money will be back in the economy. But let's have that debate. Do we want more money in Washington or more money in the economy?
Do we? That's kind of a fallacious question, man. And you want to talk about fallacious questions. You're saying that the wealthiest people work the hardest and therefore they deserve all the money. Oh, that's great. In fact, that's not how the real world works. Often the most hardest working people make the least amount of money. Oh, you didn't know that, did you? No. Some asshole sitting there pushing buttons in the stock market doesn't actually work harder than somebody who's a construction worker. Hate to break it to you, man. You're wrong. A construction worker works much harder than that hedge fund guy. Or how about a fast food employee? Or even somebody who does roofing during the summer. In fact, the less skilled you are, the harder you end up working. But also, the less money you make. That is how this works. Now, look, I'm not saying people with skills don't work hard. It actually does take a lot of time and effort to get an education. It also takes a lot of money, which of course bars certain people from doing so. But look, even if everybody had free college education, not everybody would go. Some people, we still have to have people to do those jobs. And what Rand Paul and them are saying is that people who choose to do those jobs, or who have to do those jobs, don't deserve enough money. It's their fault for not working hard enough. It's ridiculous. Look, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. End of story. That's it. If you work full time, you should not be living in poverty. Full stop. You shouldn't need government help. Why do you think we've been calling for a living wage? Because that would actually solve the issue. You get a living wage for working, in a low wage industry. You can at least afford to pay your bills and live on your own without having to get government assistance, which Republicans hate. But to Rand Paul, in his world, well, he wants to take away things like the minimum wage so that employers will be able to pay whatever the hell they want. And in most cases, you can kind of guess which direction that would be. What, you think employers will actually choose to pay their workers well out of the goodness of their heart? Some might. Most won't. Especially when we're talking about low-wage workers. As I said, there are a few out there that actually do pay a living wage. And those places are great. Those places have actually made the conscious decision and the good economic decision, because it's good economics to pay your workers more to invest in your own community. Because they're going to spend that money in the community, which makes everybody do better. That's why we should do this. But these large multinational corporations, they're not invested in their own community. They're invested in their stock, their shareholders. People who hold stock in their company. So they don't care. They'll keep those wages low so they can make an extra buck in the bottom line. Now, Rand Paul is going to double down on this whole idea in a conference call with the Huffington Post on Monday. Now, he said, I think it's both government policy and some of the way the economic fruits are distributed, he says, of income inequality. And I think it would be foolish for anyone to argue that it doesn't have something to do with work and effort. And also doesn't have something to do with the way the public approves of the way that you're doing, whether the public approves of something you're selling. Walmart is phenomenally successful because everyone votes every day that they like their products and their prices. And that's the way the market economy works. Actually, you know, Rand, Walmart's successful now, at least. It used to be different before, back when Sam Walton actually ran the company. Now that his prick kids took over, it's a completely different direction. They're successful now because they sell cheap Chinese shit. And they're also successful because they get massive amounts of government welfare in the form of tax breaks and corporate welfare. Also, Walmart pays its workers so little that they have to get things like food stamps to live on. Which, of course, guess what? Guess where a majority of that food stamp money is spent? In the place with the lowest prices. Walmart. And, of course, they have to get Medicaid as well. Because, once again, Walmart offers a health plan to some of their employees. But this health plan, and here's the trick here. A lot of companies use this trick. Oh, we offer great health insurance. If you could afford it. And they often pay so low that you actually can't get that health insurance through the company. But they can also say, see, we offer great competitive plans, healthcare plans through our company. What are you talking about? We're great to our employees. No, you're not. You're fucking awful to your employees. But look, man, this is a result of Republican policy positions, conservative policy positions, positions like Rand Paul. Let's give everybody tax cuts. That ended up, of course, as Rand Paul's health plan, tax plan ends up doing, is helping the rich. Let's also cut social services for the poor. Let's eliminate minimum wage and then blame poor people for being poor just because they don't work hard enough. That's the conservative plan. It's bad for America.